US interest rates have been at 0% since 2008. We know they have to come back to a normal level, so the question everyone is asking is, when will the US interest rates go up? That's the person who decides interest rates. Janet Yellen chaired the US Federal Reserve. In a recent speech, she said, "As the recovery progresses, we will assess the degree of remaining slack in the labor market." What she means is that the US Federal Reserve looks at the labor market slack as an indicator of inflation. Only when slack decreases, the central bank will see the need for raising interest rates. What does she mean by slack in the labor market? How do we measure it? Let's check with our economics professor. To understand slack in the labor market, we need to think about how the population of a country is involved in the labor market. First, we have those who are too young to work. And we also have those who are too old to work. We call these two groups the non-working age population, and we know that they are not very active in the labor market. Now let's focus on the working age population. There are three types of individuals. Those who hold a job, we call them employed. Those who are interested in working but cannot find a job, we call them unemployed. The sum of these two is what we call the labor force. The third type is those who decide not to participate in the labor force. Where do we see slack in this slide? By slack, we mean workers who are currently not working, but could join the labor force if the economy grows. There are two sources. One that is obvious, those who are unemployed, because we know that they are looking for a job. The second source is those who are out of the labor force. It could be that for whatever reason, they are not willing to be part of the labor market. Let's measure these two sources of slack with two ratios. The first ratio is the unemployment rate. We measure this by taking the number of unemployed people and dividing it by the labor force, the sum of the employed and the unemployed. The second ratio is labor force participation rate. We get this ratio by dividing the labor force, the employed and the unemployed, by the working age population. Let's look at how the unemployment rate has behaved during the crisis. There was a large increase as a result of the recession that brought the unemployment rate to 10%. This was the time when the amount of slack was the largest. Then we see unemployment decrease as the recovery starts. Today, the unemployment rate is below 6%, what we might consider normal level for the US economy, not far from the natural rate of unemployment. Let's now look at how the participation rate has behaved during the crisis. During the recession, the participation rate decreased very fast. This means that many people were leaving the labor force. But unlike the case of unemployment, we have not seen participation rates go back to normal levels. In fact, they have not even started recovering at all. What is going on? We see unemployment rates recover and telling us that the labor market is almost back to normal, but participation rates look so different. Where have all those workers gone? Why have they dropped from the labor force? There are two possible explanations. Labor force participation rate is decreasing for reasons which are not related to the crisis. This is what we call a structural explanation. The second theory is that the decrease is the result of workers that have been discouraged and have left the labor force. The explanation that the change in labor force participation is all structural works like this. We know that participation rates change over the lifetime of the worker. They are low when we are very young. They reach a peak between 25 and 54 years old, and then after 54, they decrease. But we know that the US population is getting older, so there are more workers in the third column. This means that the participation rates in the aggregate must be coming down, and this is not the result of the crisis. That was a plausible explanation for why participation rates have not increased. But is it right? If the explanation is right, we should not see much change in the participation rates within a certain age group. Let's look at what has happened to the participation rate of workers with the highest probability of working, those between 25 and 54 years old. The data shows that participation rates for this group look almost the same as the total participation rate. This means that it cannot be all demographic explanation. It must be that some of these workers have dropped because of the crisis. They were discouraged, and the recovery has not made them change their mind yet. So what did we learn after looking at the data? Measuring slack in the labor market is not easy. in particular distinguishing between workers who have voluntarily left the labor force and those discouraged. Unemployment rates are back to normal, almost no slack left there. But participation rates have not recovered. Yes, some of this is due to demographic reasons, and so it might be permanent, but some of it is coming from workers who are discouraged by economic conditions and will join the labor force if things improve. Back to interest rates. When will they go up? The U.S. Federal Reserve still sees slack in the labor market, and this means no clear pressure on inflation. Interest rates will have to go up, but not yet. The first increase might happen in the spring of 2015 or even later.